Thanks very much for having me. WSO2 is a fantastic company, and it's great to be here. So I'm going to talk at a very different level than Sanjiva. I want to talk about this next big wave of technology, which many people call the Internet of Things. But I've been calling it the Internet of Things and Humans. And I want to explain why that is and give you some perspective on what this next wave of technology is going to do to business and how it's going to transform the way we design and build applications if we get it right. So, why are we going backwards? Oh, I hit the wrong button, sorry. There we go. Edwin Schlossberg once said, the skill of writing is to create a context in which other people can think. And that's a lot of what I'm going to try to do for you here, is to give you a sense of how to think about this technology. So when you think about the Internet of Things, you probably think about devices, the new Apple Watch or the Nest thermostat. But I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about Uber. How many of you here would think of Uber as an Internet of Things application? Probably very few of you. But it's enabled by the smartphone, which is an Internet of Things device. It's packed with sensors. Those sensors are making all kinds of new things possible. That idea that you can actually know where the cars are, that the car can find you in real time, that's made possible by the fact that both you and the driver have this incredible connected device. So, you're able to get that reliable pickup. It's also connected to a big data backend that handles things like payment, location, and so on. But what's really interesting about it, it's really a way of rethinking a real-world process. Aaron Levy, the founder of Box.net on Twitter, put it perfectly. He said, Uber is a $3.5 billion lesson in building for how the world should work instead of optimizing for how the world does work. That is really my first lesson to you. The Internet of Things is an opportunity to rethink workflows and experiences. How do we actually interact with people in computers? So that real-world UI revolution is what we're looking for, and that the software we're going to build in the next decade is going to have to enable. And revolutions like that are driven by magical applications. Uber seems magical to people who were not really, 5 years ago, you go, oh my God, you could actually just sort of call a car and it'll just show up, find you. You can talk to the driver. This is a complete rethinking of how what used to be called taxis work. So, what I would challenge you is that when people want to copy Uber, and everybody will, because when there is a magical app which is really successful, people want to be like that. So when a startup says, we're going to be the Uber of X, this new thing, you should ask yourself, how can WSO2 technology and what I'm doing, building on that technology, help them to do it? When UPS or FedEx says, wow, people's expectations have really been changed. People can call a car in real time. Why do they have to schedule package pickup a day in advance or take it into the pickup? You go, how could we help them do that? Because that's where the bar is going to be in terms of what people expect of logistics applications in future. Okay, here's another application that you probably wouldn't think of as an Internet of Things application, the Apple Store. But again, enabled by the smartphone, you basically have a company that really rethought the retail experience. We don't actually need to have people standing behind cash registers. We can have lots of salespeople who can interact with the customers, who can just call the product out of the back room with their smartphone. It's already connected to a big data backend with your credit card if you're an Apple customer. And it becomes this seamless, transformative, magical experience, which also employs a lot more people. We'll come back to that idea. So again, it's this magical experience, the rethinking of a workflow in the real world. Now, here's another company that's trying to think about how to rethink retail and payment, and that's Square. And here we do see an obvious Internet of Things device. But in some ways, it's probably less of a rethinking, at least in a retail context, than Apple. When you go into Square-enabled coffee shop. Well, sure, they're using an iPad instead of a cash register, but it's still the cash register model. But you got to remember that the original idea of Square was that anybody could take a credit card anywhere on the street corner, and once again, you see this combination of sensors, the smartphone, and a rethinking of the complete way that we've just taken for granted that a process works. And it goes further. If you are in the store and you actually have the Square app running on your phone with a Square Wallet app, your face just shows up on the register. And so they kind of know it's you, and you can kind of, if you go to a regular store, they can actually have your order ready for you, so on. So there's a lesson here that sensors allow us to do less, to take things out of the application. And that's a really big part of this coming world. And sometimes that do less isn't even technology. It's really a business decision. Where Uber said, no, we're not even going to let people pay in cash. You can only pay one way. And not only that, we're not going to allow you to tip. We're just going to basically automatically include an amount, or not include an amount, depending on how Uber does it. There's some issues there, which we will come back to. But there are decisions that you make to simplify the user experience in a world of sensors. And then you have to take that even further. Here's another company. This one is I'm an investor in through my venture fund, O'Reilly Alphatech Ventures, called CoverPay. Same kind of thing, that Uber kind of experience where you can literally walk out of the restaurant without paying, explicitly paying, because the act of dining is the act of buying the dinner, right? They know who you are, and you've made the reservation, and bang, you walk out. They bill you. This is another one that you wouldn't really think of as a rethink workflow, but Kiva, the robotics company that Amazon bought, allows you to rethink the way a warehouse is organized. Here's another one, a company called MakeSpace, which again, OETV is an investor in. You know about storage lockers, the moldy, damp room with lots of boxes in, and the stuff you want is always in the back, right? Well, they're taking a Kiva-like approach and an Uber-like approach, saying, well, great, you just take a picture of what's in the box, keep track of it, and then you can say, hey, I need my skis, and your skis show up at your door the next day. So they're kind of, you can then turn it into a vast robotic warehouse. Again, total transformation of how we think about a whole industry. But also back to the use of sensors on the phone. I don't know how many people are fully tuned in to how much the interfaces are changing. The Moto X is my favorite phone because it really is a phone that's optimized with its sensors. It's optimized to talk, but also to listen. It's you can talk to it when you're not touching it, and it wakes up. You basically, it's paying attention. It knows when you're driving via the sensors in the phone, and so it acts differently. That's really the beginning of a whole different way of building apps. So you have to kind of add that to your product sensibilities. Microsoft is trying to do the same thing with Cortana, their predictive analytics and speech recognition product. IBM Watson has now been turned into a platform. I was glad to hear Sanjiva talk about platforms because they're so central to the way value gets created in our industry. And Watson, I think IBM's put $1 billion to invest in startups that are using Watson technology for predictive analytics and AI. So the world of sensors and the world of AI are actually two halves of the same whole, and you need to think about it that way. But the second version of this lesson 2 of do less is to do more. I mean, check out the receipt that Uber sends you. It literally shows where you went, how long it took. Has information about the driver, exactly breakdown of what you paid. Really useful information. So there's this huge amount of additional capability, not only to simplify, but also to enrich that human experience. There's even, through platform integration with Expensify, for example, and I'm sure it will also happen with Concur and Tripit, you have this situation where you can have the car meet you when you arrive at the airport. So again, integration into this bigger platform. So that's kind of magical world of the future that we're building towards. But this is the key question in this world of the Internet of Things. How do we build the capabilities of devices to build better human experiences? My third lesson about the Internet of Things is to build software above the level of a single device. We're used to thinking about devices, and it's a mistake. Uber is a system. It's a system of multiple devices. I got this notion of software above the level of a single device from Dave Stutz, who wrote a fabulous essay when he left Microsoft in February 2003. He was the head of Microsoft's open source efforts, and he was frustrated because Microsoft was sort of seeing open source as the enemy. And he said, I love this line, he said, stop looking backwards. Useful software written above the level of the single device will command high margins for a long time to come. The whole transformation that open source brought to the world, which was a big part of my thinking about Web 2.0 that Sanjeeva mentioned earlier, was that open source commoditized traditional software and it drove value to services and to data. And you look at all the companies like Google or Uber, for example, that are really data plus services rather than software as the source of lock-in and business advantage. The data is at the heart of Uber. You've got real-time location tracking, you've got dispatch, you've got trip tracking, you've got names and faces, you've got payment. That's amazing. A car pulls up and you go, yeah, that's the driver whose face just showed up on my, and you know his name, or her name. It's got dynamic pricing and it's got reputation. A lot of data there. And it's really important, of course, that many of these data services are not run by Uber. That great line from Jeff Bezos, no undifferentiated heavy lifting. We build on the work of others. And that's why something like WSO2 is so important, because it's a platform that allows you to focus on your unique advantage in your application. But I think increasingly we need to think about all these other kinds of services. Braintree, for example, is Uber's payment service. Twilio for the communications. There are a set of higher level services that need to be integrated. And I think one of the the cutting edges for WSO2 has got to be actually building in support for higher level services. The fourth lesson that I take from Uber and its ilk is to close the loop. Chris Sacca used to be the head of special projects at Google. He's now an investor. He was an investor in Twitter, an investor in Uber. And he said, what I learned is to only invest in things that close the loop. Now, let me give you an example of that. Google Maps. My usual route coming over from Oakland to San Francisco, you can see the traffic is red on the bridge. There's not much I can do about it. There's no other way other than taking BART, which takes even longer some of the time, but often do make that choice. But sometimes, as in this particular day, the traffic was backed up simply on the approach to the bridge, and the bridge itself was clear. What did Google do? It said, go around this way, right? Go a little further, but save time. That's adaptive, real-time, increasingly going to be the norm and the expectations. My fiancée, Jen Polk, who's the founder of Code for America, had an even more amazing experience. She was in Texas going to visit her grandmother using navigation because of unfamiliar roads. She gets on the highway. It says, stay on this highway for 12 miles. And about a mile in, it says, get off at the next exit. She's like, whatever. She gets off. She sees this long line of cars getting off. And then she sees as she's going down the ramp, an accident up ahead. That's the result of Google's acquisition of Waze, which is not only real-time, but also using data from consumers to report accidents and to get all that, again, into real-time predictive analytics on your devices and in your services. So that's where the world is going. Feedback, another part of this data world. Uber requires you to rate your driver. Turns out they also have the drivers rate the passengers. I actually found my rating. They don't make it public, but there was a JavaScript hack published recently, which briefly worked, where I found my rating. And, it's kind of amazing. It's like the driver can go, I don't want to pick up that person. that person's a jerk, you know? And you think about that, it's this whole reputation system, which started with companies like eBay, is becoming a critical way of thinking about services. Clay Shirky said it really well once. He said, you know, the internet moved the model from curate first, then publish, to publish first, then curate. But it's also true, you know, it's moved it from regulate first to, you know, regulate after, you know, which is what a reputation system does. There's also real-time analytics in terms of real-time surge pricing. Obviously quite controversial sometimes that you know, you feel like, wow, Uber's a ripoff, I'm not going to take it. But dynamic pricing, I think, is an interesting part of the future for many apps. And if it's done right, I think it can be actually a powerful tool. But the key here is that we have to measure and respond. And what really strikes me is that these kinds of pricing experiments are one more example of how we're building data feedback loops. But they're now affecting services in the real world. So you probably heard Uber had a pricing experiment over the summer where they reduced prices by, I think, 25%. Now, the theory was that if you reduce the prices sufficiently, you get more people to use the service. Drivers would actually make more money because they'd have full utilization. Not sure it actually worked out. I don't know the result of that experiment. But that very idea that you're going to be taking this service and dynamically making changes and experimenting is something we've taken for granted on the web a long time. Everybody does A/B testing. But it's now true that you're going to be doing that in real-world services in this world of the Internet of Things. You know, so the principles of the lean startup, the idea that you've got to be building a measurement infrastructure, measure and respond, test, pivot, are actually moving out of our computer world and into every real-world service. So, you know, the notion that Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, has of minimum viable product being about collecting information, it should be a central part of your thinking. So, next lesson I want to suggest is to think big. Every technology revolution, major technology revolution, has been led by a company with great aspirations. You know, the PC revolution, Microsoft had this idea there'll be a PC on every desk and in every home. At the time when computers lived in big air-conditioned rooms, you know, with glass walls and raised floors, you know, that was a revolutionary statement, and it created the world that many of us grew up in. You know, Google, this idea that, you know, there should be access to all the world's information. That's a big dream. And I think that, again, I see that with Uber. There are a lot of things not to like about, I think Uber is a very, very aggressive company, and there's some issues there. But, boy, big dreams. This is an article in the New York Times pointing out that Uber's real objective is not actually to unseat taxi companies. It's actually to get people to give up their cars. You know, in cities to say, transportation becomes so reliable, so universal that you don't need a car. Now, of course, many city dwellers already don't have a car, but can you push it a little bit further? And in fact, you know, Jen and I got rid of our second car because we were, well, you know, most of the time, if we need to go two different directions, one of us can take an Uber. Tesla, another company that's thinking big. You know, this idea that you can just build this network of superchargers where electric cars can get free charging. You know, big game-changing idea. Elon Musk's other company, even more game-changing. We're literally going to, you know, he says we're going to, you know, want to enable people to live on other planets. While I'm on space, I want to point to a company, again, that I'm an investor in called Planet Labs. Fabulous company. They make tiny satellites. You'll see in this next slide. That's one of the satellites. They're basically, you know, Android phones in space. The satellite weighs, I think, 2 kilograms. And they're launching hundreds of them. In fact, I believe when they look at the list of who has launched the most satellites in history, it's United States, Russia, and then Planet Labs. So it's pretty cool. But their idea is that they want to image the surface of the Earth every 24 hours. But they're also very thoughtful about it. They said, but we're going to do it at a resolution that's useful for some applications, but not others. They could have had higher resolution, but they said that would be a police state spying things. So we're going to have lower resolution that will enable agricultural applications, various kinds of really useful applications, but not surveillance. And this is Will Marshall, the CEO of Planet Labs at the Skoll World Forum. And he has this great video, it's this YouTube video, and he says, most satellites are named after birds of prey. Ours we want to be used for good, so we've called them doves. And I thought that was a very lovely sentiment. And it really leads me to this next lesson, which is when you're building software, try to create more value than you capture. I see a lot of companies that start out with that vision. I think Microsoft early on built this rich, valuable, huge ecosystem for the PC industry, and then they consumed it. Google initially creating a huge amount of value for everybody, and then they start saying, well, we need to take that application back, we need to take that application back, kind of following the path of Microsoft in some ways. And same thing with Apple, the App Store, great thing, but then more and more it becomes less vibrant as a platform. And I think it's super important to keep that cycle going. And when Sanjay was talking about the values of open source and getting the incentives aligned, I think that's really important because we really are, if you want to build a rich ecosystem of developers, a rich ecosystem of applications, you have to make sure that it works for everyone in the system. And platform vendors make the mistake over time of taking more and more of the value for themselves. So, I'm always trying to remind companies to keep the value, keep the value in the ecosystem as a whole. And, going back to a couple of these Internet of Things companies I've talked about, Square, great example. When Jack started Square, the notion was he wanted to enable a whole new class of business to be able to take a credit card because it was hard, it was expensive, you had to be a certain size. He wanted to enable the little guy, and that's been, in fact, something that's happened. Uber, even though they're in some ways, I'm not sure about their moral compass sometimes, hyper-aggressive company, their promise to drivers is about freedom and independence. Now, whether the economics are right, I think the next couple of years are going to work out how much should go to the driver, how much goes to the user, how much goes to the company. But every time I take an Uber, I talk to the driver and I say, what do you like about it? And they say, I like the freedom. And that reminded me of what Bob Young, the founder of Red Hat, used to say about open source. He said, what we really sell is freedom and control. And, I think that some of these applications really are enablers of a different kind of economy with more autonomy. And in that context, I want to bring up this book, Race Against the Machine, by Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, this notion that the machines are going to take away our jobs. And I think we have to really struggle with that idea because there are a lot of tendencies in our economy to say, well, we're going to go for efficiency above all. And I do think that we have to figure out how to reverse that trend. And in some ways, the Internet of Things can do that. You saw that when I talked about the Apple Store. This is a store that said, we're going to actually use devices to empower more people as part of the system. Right? Another OETV portfolio company is Sherpa Health. And they have basically a system where you can actually, doctors online can actually do primary triage online, connect you with, help you work through your insurance problems, et cetera, et cetera. It's smarter healthcare by putting humans in the loop. So, big idea. I've been on a commission with the Markle Foundation looking at the future of the economy and this concern that we're losing jobs. And one of the things that I've focused on is the idea that what we need is work, not jobs. We have to identify what needs doing in our world. A great example, I saw this article recently, rapid aging in Singapore could halt economic growth by 2030. The aging of the world's population, Sri Lanka aside, and places like that where I think young people still outnumber older people. In modern, Western countries, we are looking at a sort of a demographic inversion. That is going to create huge problems, but also huge opportunities. You know, who's going to take care of those people? You know, but also feeding the world, improving health, teaching and caring for children, rebuilding infrastructure, energy and water conservation. This is work that needs doing. You know, and I think so much of what we focus on in startup land here in Silicon Valley is trivial. I think there's something like you know, a dozen applications, a dozen companies funded to improve laundry, and you know, meanwhile, you know, there's colossal problems like jail overcrowding or food stamps, you know, access to social services that nobody's investing in. And I want to actually talk a little bit about that in the last section of this talk. So all of the transformative technologies I'm talking about can be a huge part of solving real problems. But what's at the heart of that is to remember that what we are doing as an industry is serving people, putting technology to work serving people. And that's why I call it the Internet of Things and Humans. So I want to, I hope I'm not, the clock's gone away, so I don't know where I am time-wise, but I hope this is okay to continue. I once had a conversation with an executive at Fidelity Investments, and he said, we know about all these new technologies. What we don't know is how to organize ourselves to use them effectively. And that actually brought me to another aspect of this Internet of Things and Humans that I really want to bring to your attention. These systems are made of computers and humans working together. You know, Uber is a system that is not just software, devices, data. It's software, devices, and drivers. You know, the Apple Store, it's retailers. You know, the people who are helping you there in the store. But this is true even on the web. This is a slide from a talk I gave at Amazon in 2003. You can see it's a different format slide. I talked about what seemed to me to be one of the unique characteristics of web applications as distinguished from all previous applications, and that was that, like the Mechanical Turk, which, if you don't know, was a hoax in the late 1700s, early 1800s, that purported to be a mechanical chess-playing machine. The secret was that there was a chess player hidden inside this device. So the human was inside what appeared to be a robot. A small aside, this device actually inspired Charles Babbage to actually wonder if a real computing machine could be created. So the hoax eventually gave rise many years later to the real thing. But this notion that web applications still have people inside them is central. You know, I first came on that notion when I was working on my advocacy around the Perl programming language. And I was thinking, why are languages like Perl and Python so important on the web? And it turned out because they were often building things that were temporary. You had to keep changing them. One of the authors of one of my books said, what do you do? He said, I spend all day writing regular expressions to match ticker symbols, news stories to ticker symbols for finance.yahoo.com. This is back in the 90s. I thought, wow, so here's this Yahoo application, still has the programmer inside it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, wow, that's true of all web applications. And you really see that in this whole area of DevOps, which is why we run a conference called Velocity, which is all about, in many ways, the human side of how you actually run a modern application. And this really came home with healthcare.gov, because remember that colossal failure that we had here in the US about the site that did not work. Well, a team from Silicon Valley came in and fixed it, right? And by April 15th, they'd enrolled 8 million people, more than their original target, so they actually made it work, right? So it was this magical team of engineers, right? Turns out, if you read the Time cover story by Stephen Brill, it wasn't tech wizardry. It was actually people management. This is Mikey Dickerson. He was a site reliability engineer from Google, who is now the head of something called the United States Digital Service, which is trying to bring modern technology skills into the US government. He basically did stand-up meetings focused on why people weren't able to keep the promises they made to each other. Joe, you didn't stand up those 6 servers. You said, why didn't you stand up the 6 servers? Oh, well, I didn't get the security clearance from Mike. Mike, why didn't you give him a security clearance? He never asked for it. What do you mean? I filed a ticket last week. You know, I never got the ticket. Turns out these guys are using different ticketing systems from 2 different contractors. You know, they didn't even know that they weren't talking to each other. They were just, you know, blind. And so it was just basic management, you know, and so much of DevOps is about breaking down those silos inside organizations and getting people to talk to each other. And I love this book. It's actually a novel about DevOps called The Phoenix Project. And I read it not long after the healthcare.gov you know, disaster, which I kind of had a close-up look to because my fiancée was working at the White House at the time. And I was in D.C. a lot. And it really got across that human side. And actually, I'm running low on time, so I'm going to rush through this. But, you know, the big idea of this in DevOps is a promise theory, which is this idea that, you know, people make promises to each other, machines make promises to each other. It's a network of promises. And one of the problems in Washington is that the promises are all made by legislators to lobbyists, to other legislators in a political process, rather than a bottom-up, this is what we really need to do for the users. And that really is the next big piece of what I want to talk to you about, because this next idea about building services for humans is really at the heart of what we do at Code for America, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. And I want to start with this quote from Ezra Klein, who wrote about healthcare.gov. He said, what we don't get is the pain and trouble of interfacing with government bureaucracies that the poor struggle with daily. You know, healthcare.gov was not an exception, and we've really seen this up front at Code for America. And in particular, we worked last year in San Francisco on food stamps. Now, I learned a bit about food stamps from the Code for America work, but also from an amazing program on Marketplace. They talked about food stamp cards, or it's called EBT cards, are recharged, I think, Wednesday nights at midnight. Now, first of all, terrible user experience thing right there. Why are they recharged at midnight? Somebody picked that time. People go shopping at midnight. Who goes shopping at midnight? People who are very hungry, right? Think, well, first user interface fix would be to recharge them at a more reasonable hour, but that's just the beginning of the problem. Because what our Code for America team in San Francisco discovered was that frequently people would go shopping there at midnight, they get to the front of the line with their groceries and discover that their card didn't work. Why? Because people got some kind of legal letter that was incomprehensible. And maybe the English wasn't their first language, maybe they didn't even get the letter because they moved address and they didn't comply, and so on. So they wrote an application that basically just sends people a text message saying there's a problem with your benefits, call the office. And it's increased compliance by 40%. So Jake Solomon, who worked on that project, wrote a great post on Medium called People, Not Data. And he talked about user needs and how we create empathetic services. And that's so critical for how to think about what we do. The UK government is also focused on this. They have a set of design principles that I highly recommend to you. Search for UK government design principles. The first one is start with needs, user needs, not government needs. And we're really trying to bring that thinking to government. It's particularly important, I think, for these services that people have to use. And really, our mission at Code for America is really framed around this. You guys probably know this wonderful phrase from Abraham Lincoln from the Gettysburg Address about government for the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. We've kind of taken that as our rallying cry. Government can work for the people, by the people in the 21st century if we make it so. And we're really working with city governments in particular, but also sometimes states. And we've actually done a lot of work outside the organization to try to get this to happen at the federal level and also around the world, to start to think about how do we build empathetic services? How do we build services that have people taken into consideration all the way from the design stage through the operations and into that user experience? But you can read that for the people as for people. You can read by the people as by people. And that kind of leads me with kind of a mission statement for all of you, which is that we can build services for people, by people, in the 21st century, but only if we make it so. Let's not make it an internet of things. Let's make it an internet of things and humans. Thank you.